guys, in the next two videos we're going to be discussing Reconstruction. The first video we're going to be discussing what Reconstruction was, we're going to be looking at the definition of it, and also the politics of Reconstruction. In the second video we're going to be looking at how the South recovered from the Civil War and how they reacted to their new changing situation with the lack of slaves and how the freed people adjusted to freedom and how the South in general reacted to the politics of Reconstruction. So let's go ahead and get started with part one. Reconstruction was the period of time in which the United States recovered from the Civil War. This spanned the years 1865 to 1877. The term is also used to describe the federal government's plans to rebuild and readmit the southern states following the war. What proved to be one of the biggest issues with Reconstruction was that Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, and Congress all had differing plans on how to approach Reconstruction. Let's first look at Lincoln's plan. Lincoln had made it very clear that he intended to be lenient on the South. In December of 1863, Lincoln presented his Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction, better known as the 10% Plan. Under this plan, former Confederates would be pardoned except for high-ranking officials as long as they swore an oath of allegiance to the United States, which when you think about it, you all do every morning at school in probably a much less formal way. So once 10% of the 1860 voting population swore that oath, a state could begin reestablishing a state government and sending representatives to Congress. And once the war ended, a few states did begin undergoing the process outlined by Lincoln. Those states were Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Virginia. Lincoln's plan, however, did not sit well with a vocal and powerful Republican minority, including Senators Charles Sumner of Massachusetts and Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania. They belonged to a group known as the Radical Republicans. Radical Republicans wanted to destroy the slave power in the South, restructure Southern politics, and possibly most importantly, wanted African Americans to receive citizenship and the right to vote. However, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth before he could really implement his Reconstruction plans, and his Vice President, Andrew Johnson, had plans of his own. First, a little background on Andrew Johnson. Johnson was a Southerner from the state of Tennessee. Yes, one of the states that joined the Confederacy. Johnson was actually a Democrat and a strong states' rights supporter. He just also happened to have grown up poor and strongly opposed the power Southern slaveholders held on the region. Lincoln selected Johnson to be his running mate in the 1864 presidential election in order to help broaden the appeal of the Republican Party. Re-election was most definitely not certain, and Lincoln needed to secure votes among Northern Democrats and in the border states. In May of 1865, then President Johnson announced his own Reconstruction plan, which became known as Presidential Reconstruction. It was very similar to Lincoln's. The main difference is that Johnson moved to deny high-ranking Confederates and wealthy planters from having any voting rights. This was intended to eliminate the wealthy planter or slaveholding power that Johnson so hated. However, Johnson did pardon a large number of former Confederates, around 13,000. By pardoning them, Johnson ensured that they would not be punished for any crimes regarding secession and could immediately regain their political rights. Johnson's motive was to ensure that white people and not the newly freed men would control the South. The remaining Southern states that had not begun the process of readmittance, except for Texas, jumped on Johnson's plan. They set up new constitutions, elected new state governments, and elected people to represent them in Congress. In December 1865, the Southern states sent senators and representatives to Washington, D.C. to be sworn into office. However, Congress refused to accept the newly elected Southern members. See, the problem with Johnson's plan and his pardons was that he enacted most of them while Congress was out of session. Congress spends part of the year at home meeting with their voters rather than spending their entire term in Washington, D.C. disconnected from the people who elected them. Furthermore, following the election of their new state governments, Southern states began passing laws known as Black Codes. Black Codes were designed to severely restrict the lives of African Americans. These restrictions included that African Americans could not move, vote, quit their jobs, join the militia, own guns, own property, serve on juries, testify against white people, or hold any public office. In early 1866, Congress, without their Southern members, began attempting to fix the issues they saw with Johnson's Reconstruction plan. First, they created the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to assist the newly freed men in adjusting to life after slavery. This included with assisting with education, providing food, housing, and medical care, and offering legal assistance to the new freed men. Secondly, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The act prohibited discrimination based on race and thus overturned the Black Codes. Additionally, the Civil Rights Act declared that all persons born in the United States were citizens, therefore establishing that former slaves were American citizens. President Johnson vetoed both the Freedmen's Bureau and the Civil Rights Act. However, both moderate and radical Republicans came together and overrode the president's veto. Now let's examine Congress's plan for Reconstruction, which is known as Congressional Reconstruction. Johnson's veto angered both moderate and radical Republicans. As a result, they began working together in order to take control of the Reconstruction process and take it away from the president and give it to Congress. Congress realized that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 would be challenged in the court system, and so they acted to ensure that the law would not be determined to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Therefore, in 1866, Congress drafted the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment states that a citizen's rights cannot be denied to them by a state, that all Americans are to receive the same protections under the laws. And finally, the amendment defined American citizens as anyone born in the United States or naturalized. Naturalization means that you gain citizenship after moving to the United States. This amendment effectively eliminated the Dred Scott decision. Following the 1866 congressional elections, the Republican Party secured an even stronger hold on Congress. The next year, they passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867. This act did not recognize Southern state governments except for Tennessee, and as established by Lincoln and Johnson's plans. The act also divided the South into 5 military districts, which would be overseen by the Union Army. Furthermore, the Reconstruction Act set the requirements for Southern states to re-enter the Union. First, they would have to grant African American men the right to vote and also ratify the 14th Amendment. President Johnson vetoed the Reconstruction Acts, but Congress was able to quickly override his veto. Congress was beginning to get a wee bit annoyed with Johnson's vetoes and what they viewed as his attempts to stop Reconstruction. Congress passed what was called the Tenure of Office Act. The act stated that the president cannot remove cabinet members during the term of the president who elected them without Senate approval. So basically, if a president dies or is removed from office, the person replacing him has to get Senate approval before firing anyone appointed by the president who was elected. So of course, Johnson immediately violated this law by firing Secretary of War Edward Stanton. As a result, President Johnson was impeached by the House of Representatives. However, the Senate did not vote to remove Johnson from office. Johnson was saved and remained as president due to one vote. A real quick explanation of impeachment. Impeachment is when the House of Representatives votes to charge the president with a crime. Impeachment does not mean the president is removed from office. If the president is impeached, he goes on trial in the Senate. The Senate then votes on whether the president is removed from office or stays. 2 presidents have been impeached, President Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, but neither were removed from office. 1868 was a presidential election year, and clearly Johnson was not running for office. Instead, the Republicans nominated war hero Ulysses S. Grant. The election was quite close, with Grant only winning by a little over 300,000 votes. This was the first presidential election in which African American men could vote. Around 500,000 African American men voted, and 90% of them voted for Grant. The election highlighted how important the African American vote was, and would continue to be for the Republican Party for nearly the next 100 years. After the election, the radical Republicans proposed the 15th Amendment. The amendment states that a person cannot be denied the right to vote due to race, color, or previous condition of servitude. In 1870, the amendment was ratified. So let's now do a quick review of what we learned so far about Reconstruction. There were three main plans for Reconstruction: Lincoln's 10% plan, Johnson's presidential Reconstruction, and Congressional Reconstruction. Congressional Reconstruction included the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau and the establishment of 5 military districts in the South, then the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments. Finally, there were the three so-called Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th Amendment, which was discussed in the Civil War video, outlawed slavery in the United States unless you're imprisoned. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to anyone born in the United States and provided equal rights to all U.S. citizens. And the 15th Amendment extended voting rights to anyone, male, regardless of their race.